One of the statements that has been made by the Anthropic CEO this time has been that within the next 10 to 12 months, software engineering is going to be extinct. The word of the year for 2025, which is agent or slash agentic.
What is an agent? So agent is nothing, just the AI algorithms. Only top 10 banks within the United States, they are trying to build their own LLM.
When software engineering goes extinct, data will be owned by the organizations.
There are three pillars for any new product development using the emerging technology: data, domain, and AI.
Hey Ashu, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for having me here. We thought, why don't we catch up on some of the interesting conversation that is going on in the industry? And my point was technology has really made our life very simple. A lot of technological revolutions have happened, be it industrial revolution, be it the internet revolution, and now recently the AI revolution. These revolutions are simplifying our life. And one of the industry where the example is very much evident is actually the banking industry, where everything is so streamlined as of today, what compared to what was that, 10 or 20 years back. The level of abstraction that has happened in the industry is just phenomenal. And with the advance of AI, I see this happening and getting amplified even more. But what is interesting is that, when you peel the layers of the complexity and the layer of, the compliance and the layer of processes that are running under the hood, it's fascinating to see there are so many complex problems that have been solved and so much of technology is running behind the screen that people are not aware of. And that is the whole reason, I thought of meeting you and understanding what is actually happening in these industry in the trenches of that, and which is where specifically talking today about the bank loans that common people take, but what is actually happening on the background in terms of the compliance and the regulation that goes behind how those loans are getting evaluated. There are so many thousands of decisions that are happening, so it would be fascinating to see how that is all happening and how the technology and now coming of the AI is actually going to impact that. So for us to really get into that, right, I think it will be very helpful for our audience to understand at a high level what that banking loan process looks like. And, if you can peel some of those layers for us to better understand some of those regulatory aspects, I think that is where we can start.
Thank you, Abhishek, first of all, inviting me. Now, I'll break down your question into two parts. First part is all about understanding the regulatory landscape within the United States. And second part, what is the complexity and need this whole regulatory reporting process? So starting with the first part, the regulatory landscape within the United States. The role of a regulator is to make sure that all the institutions within the United States, and I'm referring United States as a purview here, it could be expanded to the global point in time. Role of a regulator is to make sure that every institution within the United States adhere to the local, federal, and regional jurisdiction. All the rules written and given by the local authorities, state authorities, has been enforced, endured, and fully submitted. Now, to look at this part from a broader perspective, a regulator is asking financial institutions to report, collect, manage, and then submit the information in best way possible. In breach of any kind of information which is not correct, there is a heavy penalty coming to the banking of financial institution side. Now, some of the regulators, as an example, HMDA, which is Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, it says that when someone is applying for a application for a mortgage loan, the documentation submitted by the applicant should be used for the outcome purpose. Outcome could be either the approval of the loan or denial of the loan. Now, if the information is not being used in a right way, proper way, or in an authentic way, it could impact the outcome. And that's where the role of regulator comes into the picture. So what regulator says, I need to see the information given by this particular applicant, how it is being used in your process of making the decisions, and what are the decisions. So they take a random sample from you, they look at your decisioning process, they look at the original document submitted by the applicant, and then look at the decision made by the financial institution. That's regulatory landscape. The complexity part. So you see, 10 years ago, a lot of the information is being still captured through the paper documents. And I'm sure when you have applied for your mortgage loan, how many times you have signed the hell lot of documents from every category of your identification, from government issued IDs, from your income, from your employment, from property, the existing loan, everything. It's like a nightmare to manage those documents, sign on 100 different places, and then submit it to the financial institution for the loan purpose. It's still manageable because a lot of the documents are still in paper format, which is easy from a text to text basis. from an extraction perspective. Now, with the advent of DocuSign after the COVID, a lot of things are digital right now. Now, within the digital documents, there are a lot of check boxes, radio boxes, a lot of the free text boxes. This is very complex for traditional technology software to manage because the formats are changing and formats are exploding like anything. There are certain aspects we have seen in the industry, and this is my first hand experience. People are also submitting a video showing their existing properties, that these many properties I already carry and I'm applying for a new property. And those videos are getting now used by financial institutions to look at your exposure and your ability to take a new loan and repay that loan. Since the formats are changing, it is very important to understand the complexity underneath the format. Like for a video, it is very difficult for a software to understand the video and just create the input out of it for your decision making purpose. These are the complexities which are coming very heavily to a financial institution. And that's where they really and seriously struggle to manage the data integrity part.
So thank you for that background, Ashu. Let's take a look at, how the AI is being applied in this regulation that you spoke about. And specifically from the data integrity standpoint, there are a lot of ways of understanding AI. One would be, the rules are getting applied. The simple if then else checks are being applied, right? To check whether a data is, available or not, whether is it missing, applying certain business rules to it. But when we talk about AI specifically from the machine learning and deep learning perspective, what kind of applications do you see for, the machine learning and deep learning kind of AI getting applied in data integrity?
Sure, Abhishek. So, building on my previous statement where I made it very clear that formats are changing. Now, specifically for a format like pictures, videos, PDFs, or some kind of images, there are new technologies available to the market. Some of the vision-based transformer model, they have the ability to capture the information in a right way, which is typically not possible with the traditional software where, as you mentioned, if then else conditions are there, criterias are there, very static rule-based systems are there. So AI is helping, and now with the explosion of LLMs, we have the transformer-based vision models which are able to capture not only the information but also to explicitly put it into the right format as you need for your decision making process. So that's where I think AI is very important, managing the different formats, complexity of data through different sourcing process, and helping the banks to take the right decision based on the input coming out.
As you mentioned, right, AI is coming in, and for these new formats, you've got this AI and large language models specifically. Now, one of the most notorious problem with this is essentially the hallucination problem, where the AI takes a free ride and tries to, predict or generate the text as it feels like, which is not factually correct. There have been many occurrences and instances where, hallucination has sent people into trouble. For example, in legal industry, it has kind of completely fabricated, completely fake stories. There have been a recent article about Australia where some of these audit firms kind of use generative AI model, and it kind of completely fabricated the audit. It got sued. But then from your regulatory standpoint, how do you manage that hallucination and still be able to use large language models in these kind of highly regulated processes?
So hallucination is a real problem. Now, within the industry, there are specific appetite to manage the hallucination. Now, from a legal and regulatory perspective, hallucination is not at all accepted. Reason being, there is a stated law coming from the jurisdictional perspective, could be federal, could be state or local, and you have to abide by that law. So what we do, especially to manage the hallucination, and this is what I learned by burning my hands through certain examples and experiences, that we have to do the scope freeze first. That means all the answers which are gonna be come from the generative AI prompt should come from the only documents provided to it. So that's a scope freeze. Now within the prompt, we create these conditionings that anything which is beyond the current scope of the work should not be even taken into the consideration. And then we create the human in the loop process. That's where the final validation happens. So it's a three-step process. One, scope freeze. You create the input to output based on your only documents. Second, in the prompt library, you create the conditioning process and making sure that Gen AI application is not going beyond the input documents. And then third is all about the human in the loop. People do the stress test, spot checks to make sure that all the answers exhibited by the generative AI application is 100% accurate and abiding to the state and local jurisdictions.
Fantastic. So I think what you're saying is having the data in the context, putting in the guardrails, and then the last mile still being human in the loop, make sure that the hallucinations are minimized, and then it can still be used effectively in a banking kind of an industry. Building on top of that argument, I wanted to also talk to you about the reproducibility aspect of it, the audit aspect of it, because many a times, while with the classic business decisions, right, one of the reason has been you are able to reproduce that in terms of auditing that, how the decision was taken, why the decision was taken. But then when it comes to these generative AI models, deep learning models, right? One of the biggest problem is, can you get that same result if you happen to run that same process again? So from that reproducibility standpoint, from that audit standpoint, how do you make sure that it is implemented into your processes?
So, Abhishek, in the market, some people claim that there are good reasoning models which can help you to a certain extent, but after Anthropic's new study, some of the reasoning models are not living up to the expectation. However, in my solutions, we have built a different methodology altogether, and we call it traceability. This is one of my patented product from my current organization. What we have done so far, that we looked into the input documents, and then we have created the output based on the input. Now, as soon as you look into the computer and mouse over any value which is coming from the input document, it gives you the exact number of the page, location, and specificity of that particular document. As an example, supposedly you have submitted 100-page document for your loan application, and a value is coming from a specific page number 76, which is showing your income statement for the 2025. Now, if that income statement is not correct, it would be highlighted as red, and as soon as you mouse over your value to the income statement, it will show that out of the whole document, page number 75, right left corner at this location, this value is coming from. This helps the auditor to look at the values coming from the input documents and create the authenticity. That AI is not just simply exhibiting of its own. This is the value being captured from a specific location or a specific document. This is the trust building part. Once you have the
Yes.
trust with your operators, with your examiners, they can actually look into some of your predictive part also. So it's a first part where the basic input information is being captured rightly. And if not captured, it also shows the error part there. And then the second part, all about the decisioning and the predictive part.
The other dimension that I wanted to explore with you was really the explainability part of it, right? So, hallucination, reproducibility, and now the explainability part of it, where because it's a black box model, the way it has taken the decision, it's very, very hard for us to understand what weights got activated, which neural part was active while taking the decision, and you really don't know whether the decision was actually biased or not. So, how do you make sure that the decisions that are coming out from your AI system that is actually explainable from the AI standpoint?
So, Abhishek, explainability is something which can be always done through two parts. One, the taxonomy part, where you already have the rules defined, criteria, conditions defined within the purview of your own scope of the work, and you can explain everything basically using with the taxonomy. However, there are some statistical methods also. For a neural network, there are techniques like LIME, SHAP, which is more attribution driven. You can make use of these techniques to at least explain certain part of it, if not 100% fully. Then the techniques like saliency map, the attention map, they give you very good understanding that if something is being considered as a final outcome, what are the different attributes driving that outcome from a neural network perspective. Now, when it comes to Gen AI, that's where it becomes really interesting. So recently we have applied one technique called latent space exploration. Sounds very new, but that's nothing. It's just a newer format of principal component analysis. So what it does, it basically creates a causation effect between input and output. So a specific change in input, how much it's going to impact the output, and then you do it in the reverse order. You change the output by enforcing certain things, and then see how input's gonna be changed through the prompt library. And this is where it's a hit and trial methodology, but it actually gives you a very good causation effect between input and output. And that causation is nothing, just the explainable part of your output to be produced by using certain inputs into consideration. However, I would still say that combination of taxonomy as well as the statistical method both should be used to explain when it comes to a regulatory landscape, because sometimes these complex techniques are also not being approved, endorsed by a regulator. They're still trying to see as much as transparency possible, and that's the industry need. So having a good taxonomy and explainable things coming from the taxonomy is more useful.
Fantastic. So I think I want to now move towards, the word of the year for 2025, which is agent or slash agentic. And when it comes to agents or agentic solutions, there is a new word that has been coined in the market, which is agent wash. People are implementing, AI or not so much of AI, and they are calling it agentic. And from that agent wash perspective, there is a lot of misunderstanding about what agents are and how the agents are getting applied. But I would be curious to know about your perspective of, how the agents, whether they are being used in your industry right now. If so, what kind of agents are being applied in these kind of regulated industries?
So, Abhishek, agentic AI is the coolest kid in the corner, right? Before going into the agentic AI part, I would like to probably put down some words on the agent itself. What is an agent? So, agent is nothing just the AI algorithms, AI mechanics of the certain applications, which independently perceive the environment, number one, then set the goals, plan the activity, execute the activity, produce the results, and then do the looping part of it, which means if results are not up to the mark, how they can actually self learn the results for the future purpose. So that's an agent, kind of a autonomous body in a way, you can say. In a compliance industry, the autonomy is something which is highly precarious. The reason being, there is a saying in the compliance industry, if it's not 100% correct, it's not correct at all. And that's where autonomy is function of, just making sure that you cannot just go blindly by the agent autonomy. There is a continuum as per Andrew Ng, and you can always fine tune the autonomy by having a good prompt library and putting a more guardrails. So in our case, we create the agents which are doing certain jobs, but the last mile is always done by the human in the loop as an expert solutions. And we go by that logic because end of the day, we have to produce something which is 100% accurate, else it is not been accepted at. So agents are good. We have created two agents in one of my recent product. One is the extraction agent, which is format agnostic. You can just provide any kind of formats available within the scope of the work. The agent would first ingest the all the documents from different format, extract the information, classify it into different packets, and produce the results in a very quicker way. So that's the first agent. Second agent, we have created the validation agent. Now, this validation agent looks into your input documents as well as the final outcome created by the bank institutions, compare both the things, and then flag the issues wherever it's available. It not only flags, and as I said earlier, also the traceability part, the authenticity part. So if there are certain errors coming from input as well as output, it will bring you back to that original document and shows that this is the area where the document is taking the value and it is not correct as per the order in nature. So that's the agent part we are using. But again, I want to re-emphasize one thing, that autonomy is important and it varies across different industry. In retail, in marketing, you can have some kind of cost of error, but in compliance, in governance, in regulatory landscape, the cost of error is so high. That's why it is not acceptable to have any kind of error.
Fantastic. Seems like we're learning even more new words when it comes to agent slash agentic. So cost of error, the autonomy's nature of these agents, the continuum on which these can straddle from being very restricted to being highly autonomous. So I think these are some of the good frameworks to be kept in mind while designing these agents for different industry, dependent upon the amount of regulation, dependent upon the amount of restriction that an agent has. And then putting it across very simply that an agent is essentially a mechanism that has got access to tools, has got a planning, has got a memory, and is able to perform the action or the task basis the tools and the resources it has got available. I think it's a good framework. And then really closing it out while the agents are operating, you still need another agent, which is the human agent, to really review the final product that has been produced by these agents to make sure what we are generating or producing is actually 100% compliant. So quickly, I wanted to now take a step back because we learned from you about how AI is so much relevant into the banking industry or these regulatory processes that we discussed today. We spoke about the whole traceability aspect of it. We spoke about the reproducibility aspect of it, the explainability aspect of it. We also touched upon the agentic. But taking a step back, and looking at this HMDA regulatory reporting requirements. What it also states is that all the data that is getting aggregated has to be publicly made available, which in a way also means that this is the data that can be utilized by people or by other institutions to gain strategic insights about their competitors. So how does, the financial institutions make sure that, whatever they are submitting is not being used for any kind of a wrongful purpose or wrongful?
So I'm glad that you're asking this question because this is very important. So if you go by HMDA regulation, there is a specific site which is FFIEC. You go there and download any kind of data which has been submitted to the HMDA for reporting purpose. Now the catch is very simple here. This data is very exhaustive in nature, by the way. It has all the demographic information, loan information, applicant information, the APR information, jurisdictional information, everything. However, they have masked the PII. So when I say PII, typically the name of the borrower, the co-borrower, gender, they have coded into a different numbers, race, ethnicity, everything is being coded there. Now this data is still good. And we have used this data more from academic perspective, more from a research perspective. But it's not something which can directly help a competitor to look at a specific individual. However, it is still used for the trend analysis purpose. And this is good because I really like the way HMDA approaches this data, and they create the trend based analysis, which creates a fair competition in the marketplace. So, lender one can easily look at the performance of lender two in a specific jurisdiction and see how many loans in being that jurisdiction distributed, denied, approved. That's a fair competition without disclosing any PIIs of any individual at a borrower or co-borrower level.
While this can help you create fair competition, but on the other side, if you see, with the advance of AI, and you yourself mentioned about, AI being used by the regulators from the data integrity standpoint, from the data surveillance standpoint, and then in order to make the data compliant for submission, on the other side, these large banks and large financial institutions are also then now using more and more sophisticated technology. They are building more and more sophisticated AI algorithms to make the data compliant for submission. This in a way has actually also resulted into kind of an AI war. And this AI war is actually very expensive and is going to be high cost for these small institutions and small lenders who might not be able to have these kind of AI solutions in place to be able to comply with these regulations. So how do you think about that?
So, Abhishek, so far in my experience, only top 10 banks within the United States, they are trying to build their own LLM. Wow. By ingesting all possible data sources coming from their own ERP system, coming from their own Salesforce system, coming from the regulatory data landscape perspective, as well as the open internet data available to them. Now, beyond top 10 banks, I would still say that next 15 or 20 banks could try, because there's a huge investment cost for building these kind of Gen AI applications, LLM application, or their own chatbot in a way to say. But beyond that list, everyone else is going to probably seek some help from the technology partners, technology vendors, or a specific service provider. So I'm still a little bit skeptical to say that everyone is going to use their own LLM, own chatbot. That's not going to happen because there is a huge investment cost and not everyone is ready for that cost. And sometimes it's always buy versus build. So if you can probably buy it from a third party technology provider or service provider, why you want to invest that much time, energy, and money? However, for certain banks, of course, if they have a good budget, and top 5 banks at least in the United States, they are trying to build something of their own. Let's see how soon that would come into the picture and how much that would be useful for their workforce.
So basically, what you're suggesting me, it's actually $1 million idea, right? Or probably $1 billion idea where, like you said, while the big financial institutions might end up building it themselves, but the small institutions, which are much larger in number, right, they would still be looking out for certain vendor or certain implementation partner, right, who can offer those solutions out of box for them.
Yes, based on my experience so far, that's what I see. And it's again, cohort based segments. Some top tier banks might be using some of their own solutions, while rest of the larger population, especially the trade unions, the community banks, the regional banks, they would definitely look for a right partner to help them in the regulatory reporting.
Guys, whoever want to start their own firm or new venture or a new startup, this is the idea that we should pursue. Thank you, Ashu, for giving those insights. And, before we close out, I just wanted to also talk about, with so much of AI coming in, and recently, World Economic Forum just commenced, right? It just ended. There were so many talks about AI. Specifically, I would say the entire World Economic Forum this time was all about AI. One of the statements that has been made by the Anthropic CEO this time has been that within the next 10 to 12 months, software engineering is going to be extinct. You yourself in your industry is using AI heavily. What kind of advice would you give to the younger generation, to the millennials who are investing so much of time and effort into learning these AI skills, keeping themselves abreast? But then while they are learning coding, while they are doing software engineering, while they are becoming data scientists, on the other side, statements like, made by Anthropic CEO that it's essentially going to get vanished. How should the younger generation factor this into their approach in terms of building the career? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so I would say there are three pillars for any new product development using the emerging technology: data, domain, and AI. Data is something where people have unfair advantages. Some people have good platforms. They are using that data. They are putting that data into their databases for many years, and they always have an edge there. Now, domain is something which is very critical and very important. Let me bring my own example to you. 10 years ago, I moved from banking, financial services, healthcare industry to compliance, regulatory, and legal landscape. A lot of my technical skills, especially the data science skills, the modeling skills, the predictive analytics skills, those been directly transferable because that's how I'm being evaluated during my technical interviews, and it was all good. However, I realized that this is a very different world altogether. There is a 100-page statute coming from the regulatory authority. There is a 500-page new regulations coming into next 6 months, and I have to understand, interpret that particular regulation to build a product out of it. It took me almost 3 months to sit down with the seasoned attorneys in my company to understand the nuances of that particular regulation, the statutes, the kind of legislations. So I would say domain is always going to be very important. You can transfer all your technical skills to a new industry, but you need to spend decent amount of time to understand that particular industry, the domain part of it. So my advice would be keep learning the technical things because every single day you'll see a new thing there. But whatever domain you are in, spend decent time with the seasoned experts in the marketplace. Try to learn as much as possible because it's very easy for you to say that I can create a summary out of 100 pages. But who's going to evaluate that summary? If you do not know that domain, that particular functional skill, then how would you even evaluate your own solution? So domain is very important. And this is important, and this is going to be always remain important to understand the domain part. So data, domain, and AI. AI is good. You have a lot of tools available to learn the AI. Data is always based on the current exposure, how much data you can get and explore it. But the domain part is important. That's where you need to put a little bit more effort. There are going to be a different job profile in coming months, in coming years for sure. I want to give you an analogy here. So when automotive industry was formed, there have been few people who used to make the automotives, and then there have been a lot of people using it, and that exploded actually. So people who are making it versus people who are using it, there is a big number difference. It's gonna same happen in this industry. People who will be building the agents would always be required, but that number is gonna be small compared to people who are going to use the agent. So a new job profile which is called agent manager is coming into the horizon. So my advice to a lot of young aspirants would be to start understanding the agentic aspect of your solution, how to manage an agent, how to learn from that agent, how to make tricks of that agent, and how to make use of that agent. Now, as an example, a research coming from the McKinsey Institute is that they have around 40,000 consultants across the globe, and they have deployed 20,000 agents so far. So that's the new era, which is agentic manager role, agent manager role, agent interpreter role. These are the new roles coming into the industry. And to understand any agent, of course, you need to know about it. So my advice would be to learn more and more about the agentic frameworks. Try to make use of some of the agents available with the tools and technologies available to you at your disposal. And there are a lot of avenues where you can just go and make use of those technologies to build your own agent. Learn from it, and then create your career more into the agent management space. This is the new job which is coming on the horizon, and I'm very hopeful that this would create many millions jobs.
Fantastic. So, guys, the new mantra for building the career is data, domain, and AI. Just focusing on AI, just understanding of the data will not help. Understanding about the industry, understanding about the processes, understanding the domain, which is actually the context that goes into the AI, so that AI can perform the actions basis the instructions that have been provided, is absolutely critical. And as we move forward, this is the skill, right, that is going to be even more critical when software engineering goes extinct. Data will be owned by the organizations. The only aspect or the competitive moat for people would be an understanding of the domain, and that is what is going to get critical. So thank you so much, Ashu, for giving us time today. I think it was a really helpful and a very interesting conversation. We learned about a lot of things, a lot of new words that we learned about. Very helpful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me, Abhishek.